Hi guys, this is Jean from Happy Indulgence, and today I'm going to be going through my January wrap-up. Now, January was a really special month for me, mainly because I gave birth to my baby girl Amelia, which you would have seen on my baby vlog, which I'll link up above and down below, and on social media, and was super excited. It has been a really exhausting few weeks becoming a new parent, just getting used to the sleep schedule and the feeding schedule, and you're basically on call for a baby, but there's nothing else that we'd rather do, and we're super lucky to have a really good baby. So that was the first exciting thing. The second exciting thing is that it was also my birthday, so I had a pretty low-key one at home, but I got to eat sushi, which is my favorite food, and I didn't get to eat sushi throughout my whole pregnancy last year, so that was a big highlight for me. During January, I actually read quite a lot of books, a lot more than I thought I would, especially with everything going on with the baby. I actually ended up reading 7 books, and most of this was before I gave birth to my baby. And yeah, I'm just going to go through, as usual in my wrap-ups, the books that I love the most and my thoughts on each of them, and then it'll go down to the books that I love the least. So let's just get started. My first read of the year was none other than Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, and this is my third reread of my favorite book of all time. I loved it so much, and it was awesome reading about the crew and about Kaz and Inej, Nina and Matthias, and just going back into the world of the Grisha. I wanted to reread this before delving back into King of Scars, which I have just received in the mail, so I'm super excited about reading that one. And I also got my King of Scars Illumicrate box, which I'll link up above and down below as well, with my unboxing of that. And yeah, if you haven't read Six of Crows yet, what are you waiting for? It's basically the perfect book. You've got a motley crew, you've got memorable characters, you've got diversity, you've got impossible heists that they're trying to infiltrate, and the storyline is just on point, and I absolutely love the magic in here and the world building as well. Another benefit of reading this duology is that it is coming out on Netflix soon. I don't know when, but it has been announced that there'll be a Grisha edition on Netflix, so I can't wait for that. So obviously this is 5 stars, no contest. Next book I read is Vardaesia by Lynette Noni, and I was super lucky to receive an early edition of this book. It is coming out shortly, and it'll probably be out by the time this video is out. But this is the conclusion to the Midorian Chronicles series. The Midorian Chronicles starts off with Akane. This is the 6th book in the series. I don't know if it's sold overseas yet. I know it's super popular in Australia. In fact, it's one of the highest selling fantasy books in Australia, and it's topped all the bestseller lists in bookstores, which is super impressive, and I know why. Each and every book gets better and better. It's about a girl called Alex, and she has a really strong will. She actually trains in a different world filled with magic, and she has an ability of her own as well, and her greatest enemy is one that can infiltrate her body and infiltrate other people's bodies and mind control them, so that's super freaky. So as with all of the other books in this series, the crew does undergo a different trial, so they have to undergo a bunch of gates of testing amongst a race called the Tia Aurans, who are super proud. The whole world is technologically advanced, they're filled with magic, they've got fighting prowess, and they basically watch Alex and her friends just go through these tests and trials just for their own entertainment. So I loved hearing more about this different world. It was just super flashy and super different to our own world, and that's what I love about each and every one of these books. They're so creative, and I love the different settings and how the magic weaves into everything that they do, and how each and every book builds upon the characters as well. And Alex is a really strong protagonist. She's gone through hell and back for her friends, and ultimately this book and this series is about friendship, and she goes through, like, all her loyalties are tested in here. It's not an easy win as well, but the conclusion, like, this is how you end the series, guys. I was super happy with it. I'm not going to go into it too much more, but yes, I'm really happy with this end of the series, and it sounds like there's going to be a spin-off, so I'm excited about that as well. So I gave Vardaesia 5 stars. Next book I read and loved is The Gilda Wolves by Roshani Chokshi, and as you guys may or may not know, the Star Touch Queen is one of my favorite diverse fantasies of all time. I'll leave a link up above to my favorite diverse fantasy books, and I was the Gilded Wolves because it greatly resembled my favorite book of all time, which was Six of Crows. And that's mainly because a lot of the plot centers on the different individuals in the story, and each of them have their own affinities and their own specialties, basically. So the setting of it was also really interesting. It's set in the 1880s Paris when the Eiffel Tower is being built, and it's based around the secret order that is hunting for an artifact. So Severin and his crew are tasked with undergoing the hunt for a different artifact. In this crew, you have a historian, an engineer, a dancer who is also a baker, and a brother-in-arms. You've also got an heir as well, and he has the power to basically back up Severin and his crew. Severin is actually a wealthy hotelier, but he's also a treasure hunter, so he knows what he's talking about when he's looking for these artifacts. In this book, you've got a lot of puzzle solving, you've got a lot of banter between the characters, you've got a lot of character development. The characters are just airtight, and it's one of my favorite parts of this book because I just thought each and every one of them was so fascinating. They had their different backgrounds, and it was a really diverse crew as well. You've got an Algerian character, you've got a Filipino character, you've got an Indian character, and the list goes on. And I was also really happy to see the autism representation. And not only that, but they do also talk about their own backgrounds and where they came from and how it's formed a big part of them as well. And I loved how this diversity was inbuilt into the people that they were and the worldviews as well, which is something that you don't see often. Normally, diversity is just something that you see on the page that's mentioned, but the characters here live and breathe their own backgrounds, which is really how it should be. There's also a bit of artifact hunting, so you see the puzzle solving in action, and that was really fascinating because with the combination of an engineer who has the affinity of maths and the combination of a historian who has the intelligence of knowing different languages and different histories and pasts, it was really interesting to see them deduce what these puzzles were. One thing about the Gilded Wolves, which is why I didn't rate it a perfect 5 stars, is because I found the plot slightly confusing. You've got so many different character perspectives and you know they're looking for an artifact, but there's so much happening because it goes into their backgrounds, it goes into the way they relate to one another. Like there's a forbidden romance here as well, and then you've got Severin's past, which is slowly reviewed throughout the course of the book. So there's a lot going on here, and I found myself confused, especially towards the end, about the plot. But that didn't prevent me from enjoying the book, so I ended up giving the Gilded Wolves 4.5 stars. Next one is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer, and this was a surprise read for me because I am joining the Instagram tour later this month. It was a Beauty and the Beast retelling with a twist. So basically a girl called Harper who has cerebral palsy. She's from the world that we live in, so in the present that we know, and she gets sucked into this fairy tale world where a prince called Wren has a curse that needs to be broken. Harper has such a passion for people and she has a passion for helping others. She is not fully abled, but she doesn't let that prevent her from achieving her goals. And everything that she did really inspired the antagonist, Prince Wren, to look after his kingdom a bit more and to come out of his shell a bit more. It's actually his last season where he gets an opportunity to break the curse. And it seems like he's given up and he's resigned to leaving the fate of his kingdom in this sorcerer's hands. But Harper changes it all for him. I thought he was a really interesting character and I really liked how she really shone off the page. And his guard captain as well was also really interesting. He's basically a bit more reserved and he takes an instant liking to Harper, but he kind of stands back. There's a bit of distance between them because of his faultless loyalty to the prince. Well, he's actually loyal to a fault, so that was really interesting. I loved hearing about both of the character perspectives and how they ended up helping the kingdom around them. The things that happened in the curse as well, and how Harper wants to get back into her own world. It was such an interesting book and probably one of the best Beauty and the Beast retellings that I've read. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Next book I read is The Wicked King by Holly Black. Holy shit, guys, I was so excited to receive this book. I received it at the start of the year, so I actually devoured this really quickly a few days before the book was released. So I read this all in one sitting. I did think this book took a fairly different turn to The Cruel Prince. The Cruel Prince had so many defining moments in it that really drove the plot forward, but I found this one was mainly about the political machinations between the different characters and between Jude and Carden as well. Their relationship was really complex. I don't fully ship it because I find it to be a bit problematic. It's not just hate to love, but it's like, you know, I want to kill you type of love, and it's kind of disturbing to me. There is a lot of sexual tension and a lot of banter between them, but I found it slightly subdued in this one because Jude has basically achieved her goal, and this one she kind of floundered a bit, and I find she took a bit of a back stance, and that was interesting because, you know, what happens when you're at the top? It's like everyone is out to get you, and that's certainly what I felt about The Wicked King. You can tell that there's an underwater theme to this book as well, and I loved hearing about the undersea new character called Nikasha, which is basically an ex-girlfriend of Carden, so it's interesting to see how that weaved into the story as well, and that was really interesting. It was also a bit slower as well compared to the first book. The only bombshell that's dropped in here is at the very end of the book, so it does have an obvious lead into the last book in the series. I think it's a trilogy, by the way. But yes, I really enjoyed The Wicked King. I didn't like it as much as The Cruel Prince, but I still thought it was a solid follow-up, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Now, the next book is a bit of a different one for me, and that's Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Reid Jenkins. And basically, this book I wanted to read because I obviously read and loved The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, also by the same author. If you guys haven't read that yet, read it. Even though romance isn't your genre, everyone that I've heard that's read that book has read and loved it. Anyway, Maybe in Another Life has been on my TBR for a long time, but I actually listened to it on audiobook, and it was a really solid listen on audiobook. I have trouble concentrating on the finer details, especially when it's a fantasy or historical read. So this was a perfect book for me to listen to on audiobook. So it's basically about a girl called Hannah. She basically ends up at a crossroads. So basically one of them, she's moved back to LA and she moves in with her best friend, and her life is basically trying to figure out whether she's going to pursue her ex-boyfriend or not. It's sort of like he's the one who got away, and in one of them she ends up being disabled and ends up liking a night nurse in hospital and getting close to him, and different things happen with her best friend. And in the other one she ends up getting a dog and she moves in with her best friend and she is with the love of her life as well, so that's interesting. So I really liked hearing about these parallels and how different plot points would come through in different ways in the story, and it has a really strong thread of destiny and of things happening because they're fated to be in your life. So I found that really interesting, and it was a really solid read for me that I rated 4 stars. Now the last book, I'm really sad to say it, but this is The Girl King by Mimi Yu, and I actually didn't enjoy this one. I actually felt like I had to force myself to finish this book only because I felt obligated to, because it's a review copy, and also because it's an Asian fantasy read and also an own voices read. And normally I really enjoy my Asian fantasy, but I found this one was so bland and such a drag to get through. So it's basically about 2 sisters called Lu and Min, and one of them is really ambitious, but she basically leaves the court because she doesn't become the empress that she was promised by her uncle, and she leaves the court to go look for an army to rally her cousin that ends up in the ruling position. And then there's this character called Min, and Min is basically the reason why I found the book so boring, because I found like she was such a weak, naive character. She's basically manipulated at court between her cousin and her auntie. You can see things coming from a mile away, but Min's perspective was just really frustrating to read. And also, the villains in here are also really straightforward. They're just clear cut, they're evil for no reason, and they're just evil for the sake of it. There wasn't really much development there. And Lu was interesting enough, but then I kind of tired of her as well, because she's kind of like going around and looking for people to gather an army for, but no one really trusts her. And yeah, it was just a really boring read. There's also this other character, which is a wolf, which is a bit of a shapeshifter, but you didn't even hear much about the shapeshifting. So I found it long and draggy with frustrating characters, a predictable plot. When I got to the end, I was just glad it was over. And I ended up giving this one 2 stars. So these are all the books that I read during January. And I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on them. Let me know what you thought about these books, if you've read them, if you're keen to read them, or if you agree or disagree about my thoughts by leaving a comment down below. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks guys, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.